Great job on finishing the section. So now you should have a fully functional, dynamic, and interactive DOM interactor. I just call this application the DOMinator because it gives you a great opportunity to practice and get more familiar with element manipulation and the document object model. So let's try that out. We've got an add element option drop down. So this is dynamically created with JavaScript. So it allows us to add new elements to our main screen area. We can also select those elements in the drop-down and update the content that's contained within them. We can update the background color if we want. We can also update the font color as well. So there's quite a few options that are available to us. We can also add in different classes if we want. So we've got padded, bigger, and this is toggling the classes. So we can do padded, and if we do an update, if we want to remove padded, we just click it again. So that will toggle the class to the element. So if we want to add padded, you can see it gets added there. And we can select any one of the elements and make updates to them. So if we want them all to have the same classes and the same content, you can easily update those and add that in. If we want to add a brand new element, we can always add a brand new element, select it, and update it. So we always have to select it from the drop-down and update it. And then lastly, we also added a last option where we can click the elements and remove them from the page. So if we've got elements that we no longer want, we can simply click them, and that's going to remove them from the page. And if you go into the HTML, you can see that they are actually being removed out. So these are all contents of the element with the ID of main. Let's take a look at our source code. And going into the source code, so we created a few classes. These were to be able to toggle classes within JavaScript. We also have our main object selecting all of the elements that are immediately within main and applying a border to those so that we can actually visually see where their boundaries are. And then we created a form, and this form, dynamic form, is the main core of what we built, as it gives us the ability and full control over adding elements, updating elements, and updating content, adding stats classes, toggling classes, and a whole lot more. So all of this was HTML, just regular HTML. These inputs, the color type inputs, these are HTML5 inputs, type color. So it doesn't work across some of the older browsers, but all the new browsers are able to handle this. So if you are having trouble with the type equals color input, then you've got to upgrade your browser and or try out Chrome. As I always suggest, that Chrome is one of the more modern browsers that has all the modern capabilities generally within it. Next, we created some buttons to add the interaction, to create the interaction with the user, and we've got some basic startup content within our main element. Then we set up two different arrays. So one of the arrays was a listing of all of the different classes. We want to make this as dynamic as possible, and then we generate the drop-down using these arrays. So we have a drop-down for the classes, and then we have a drop-down for the different types of elements that we're allowing the user to create. Next, it came to the selection. So we selected each one of these inputs. So there was quite a bit of code here where we're using query selector to make selection of the appropriate elements and then add them in as JavaScript objects. And then once the connection's been made with the JavaScript object, then we can manipulate, we can get content from the element, we can add event listeners, and a whole bunch of really amazing things. Then we set up a global object called node lister. So this is where our list of all of the elements that are contained within main are going to get listed. So we've got a full list of them, and this is global, so we can access it from any one of the functions. We added an event listener to the button adder. So this gave us the ability to click and create a new element and then add that element to the main object, as well as we had the option to update the inner text content, as well as add an event listener. And then every time we have some changes, we rebuild our drop-down list. So we call that function drop-down builder every time there's some changes within the elements, if we've added or if we've removed them, or just as we're launching the application. We also added another event listener to the button where we can update. So the update button was this important button, and this basically goes through all of the elements and updates and sets the text, the inner text, and equals it to the value of the input, and updates the background text colors, so updates the colors, as well as toggles the classes of the selected classes that are within the dropdown, and giving us all of the functionality to update those elements using the input fields. Then we have another event listener, and this is the DOM content loaded. So this is just a function that fires off, an event that fires off whenever the DOM content is loaded, and usually it's applied whenever you're looking to make some immediate updates to the element content, and you want to make sure the DOM has loaded. So you want to make sure those elements are there before you try to update them, and that's why we're using that event listener of DOM content loaded. You can also use the onLoad event as well. And we loop through the different classes and create the elements. So this gives us the options that we have for the drop-down list. So we're creating the option tag, adding a value, adding the inner HTML to it, and then appending it to the drop-down list. And we do the same thing for the different elements as options in the array. So this gives us a list of all the available different types of elements we can create. Then we update node lister, and node lister goes through all of the elements that are contained within the main object and lists them out into node lists, creates a node list and lists those out. And then we've got remover elements, which we run, and this adds event listeners to be able to remove the elements when we click them. So we click and we're able to remove it. And then we rebuild the drop-down list just as we finish up here, so make sure that we're not rebuilding, we're just building it for the first time in this instance. We've got the remove element function. So this is the one that fires off whenever one of the elements gets clicked. So we're referencing it to event listeners as we're adding that to all of the elements. And then if we create new elements, we add that as well as an option to be able to click and remove the freshly created element. We've got the remove element, and then lastly we've got our drop-down builder where we loop through we rebuild the node list again, make sure that it's up to date, and then we loop through and we iterate through getting the value of the item, the index value, and then also updating the tag name so that we can see the tag name represented here. And this is why it's uppercase, because it's getting the value from tag name, and those are all uppercase. And then we're appending it to the drop-down list. So this is constantly updating. So as we update the elements that are on the page, we're getting more divs there. So we're always running the drop-down list every time we're making the update. Thanks again for taking the section, and I hope you had an opportunity to practice and get more familiar with DOM and DOM manipulation. If you have any questions or comments, I'm always happy to help. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks again for taking the course.